An important factor in catching fish is learning how to locate them. Once you gain more knowledge about where trout position themselves and how they make use of the available structure, it will help you to find more and catch more fish. Usually there is a method to the reason for everything a fish does, and if we understand that more, we will find more fish. In this first clip, we come across a couple of trout. The close fish is about 2.5 pounds, the fish in back is about 5 pounds. The first thing that stands out with respect to structure is that there is a large boulder behind them. What should also stand out is that there is no boulder in front of them. In contrast to what most anglers would assume and focus their fishing efforts towards, these two decent-sized fish are not sitting behind a boulder. If your only instinct is to fish behind or beside boulders, you would end up fishing well behind these fish, and these nice trout would likely never even see your fly, leading most anglers to quickly surmise that there are no fish in the area. Of course, that would be wrong. These trout are not sitting here for some random reason. This is a fairly good-sized boulder relative to the other rocks in the stream bed. Behind it would be an excellent cushion from the current, an easy spot for a fish to sit. But in front of the boulder is also a smaller, yet just as effective hydraulic cushion or break from the current. And it has another advantage. It is closer to the flow of food coming from upstream than any other position behind the boulder. And it also has a less variable current flow that often comes from sitting behind boulders, which makes grabbing food easier. Trout, particularly larger trout that are the dominant fish in a run, tend to sit in front of large boulders more often than smaller fish do, especially when feeding. Always fish behind a boulder or in the seam to the side, but never pass up swinging a streamer or dropping a nymph in front of that same boulder. In this next scene, we come across a nice cutthroat trout. It is hanging out under a log jam and quite distinctly on the shade line, where the bright sun meets the shelter of the shadows, creating a rather definitive line. We're going to move in a bit closer here. The fish isn't alone. As I push the camera into the sand by mistake, sorry about that, there are several whitefish, several other trout, and numerous suckers. But this guy is right on the edge of the sun in the shade, on the shade line. There's no structure on the riverbed. It's as flat and sandy as can be. But the logs above provide it and the other fish with excellent cover from predators. Definitely a nice place that you want to put your fly. Managing to get your fly tight under the logs might be a tad tough, but drifting something along the shade line, right where it will be highly visible to any watching fish, would be productive. But you also need to try and get under the log jam too. If you aren't losing the odd fly, you aren't fishing where the fish are. We've watched the activity of some good fish, but now let's turn our attention to some smaller fish and see how they differ. I mean, smaller fish are still fun, and often they can save an otherwise fishless day. We may not brag about catching the small fish, but they are still nice on a slow day. These guys are rainbows and whitefish, focusing on them and not the suckers in the background. And they are feeding actively. These guys are not hiding behind structure. They are not in the shadows. They are not seeking out deeper water. They are right in the sun in less than 2.5 feet deep of water. Like many smaller fish, juvenile fish, these guys are in the 10 to 11 inch range. They eagerly expend energy in pursuit of food and take more risks in the process. It often seems like they are suicidal, and part of that is true, as they don't really have the experience yet to be wary. But a large part of it is that smaller fish have a much higher metabolism and smaller energy reserves than bigger fish, and this makes them have to feed almost constantly. So if they have to take risks and sit out in the open where no respectable 3-pound trout would likely go, then that's what they do. Actually, I'll give them some credit. They are mostly in the sun, but at least not too far from dark cover beside them. And they are close enough to the bottom that they gain some reprieve from the current. Matter of fact, here's another area nearby where the smaller fish are very active, but some are holding deeper in the shadows, indicating that they aren't all suicidal. Let's go back to some better fish. This fellow is mere inches from the bottom. Matter of fact, other than where it rises up to grab food, its fins are likely hitting the gravel beneath it. For the most part, it is in a nondescript area with no big rocks or logs. But aside from being right on the bottom, this better fish is sitting in a deep part of the run, over about 4.5 feet deep, where the average depth is maybe closer to 3 feet. Add to that the water is quite silty and hard to see in. That actually serves as pretty decent shelter. Given the cloudy water and deepness of the run, it probably encourages this fish to hold in more barren area and feel relatively comfortable still, although it clearly takes no chances and sits right on the bottom, rather than a foot or two higher. It suggests to me that in cloudy water that has some depth to it, fish will be more prone to sit in areas we might not normally regard as being highly protected. Here we have a horde of fish coming in, mostly all white fish, with one exception, one rainbow trout. There seems to be some casual feeding going on, or at least looking and searching, but not as if there is an intense hatch. This is a bit of an odd spot for so many fish. Fairly slow water, wide open, very little structure to see. But for the rainbow, I suspect the structure it is using is, well, the whitefish. Safety in numbers. So many moving fish can confuse predators and reduce the odds that you will be targeted. Here we got a rainbow at the head of a run filled with different sized rocks and well aerated water. Let's sneak up on it. It's just on the other side of these rocks. Up and there he goes, rising to the surface. It's sitting in what would be described as a trough or a deep depression. But let's move in a bit closer. There it is. Wow, quite bouncy around here and the camera really shows it. But that fish is comfortable. Well, it was comfortable until I spooked it. Let's look at the depression though. This part of the run I would call pocket water, just by the mere fact that all those unusually shaped boulders will create wide range of currents and eddies. We usually think of pocket water as being noticeable with lots of boulders protruding above the water, causing visible seams and currents. But the same thing happens under the surface even when the boulders don't stick out so obviously. It's a navigator's nightmare with currents going in every direction. That fish, though, found a depression where most of the fast water slips right over its head. The current is likely very stable right down the trough where it's sitting. Never underestimate any depression in the riverbed. This one's a solid foot or more in differing depth. That is, it drops a good foot more than the surrounding riverbed, and even a slight 6-inch depression will give a noticeable effect for a fish. Now let's look at a trout we've looked at in another episode, called Fishing Around Boulders. I'll add that link in the corner up top. That trout isn't alone as there are several whitefish in front of it, but let's stick to the trout today. It's in a more of a classic holding position, behind some boulders and woody debris where the current is more gentle. This is probably one of the more obvious spots where you might target a trout. The boulders are big, likely big enough to stick out of the water, and spotting the break in the current would be fairly apparent. This is just proof that fish do actually sit behind boulders, just in case you're getting the impression that I was showing everything else but that. It's reaffirmation of the obvious, you might say, that fish do sit behind boulders as well. Now, while we watch this large group of fish, let's just go over what we observed today. In this video, we looked at some real-life examples of how trout may use the structure available to them. Knowing how fish use structure can be the first step to finding and catching fish. They may not always be feeding in these locations, or more accurately, in some spots they may feed more than in other spots, as some spots are more for cover or protection than feeding. When you at least know, though, where the fish prefer to go in a river, it gives you a way better chance to catch one, or two. So what in particular did we observe? Do not ignore in front of a boulder. Yes, fish the side seams and the downstream of the boulder part as well, but often big fish will sit in front of a boulder. Shade and logs, the latter often referred to as large woody debris, often hold far more fish. Sometimes in very cold water, especially in slower water where the ice may have just come off, fish will sit in the sun, as a warm sun gets insect life going in colder temperatures. But most of the time, the shade offers far more protection, and only a desperate fish will leave it. And as for logs, well, the saying is wood is good, which is vitally true. You may lose a few flies to logs, but if you aren't losing lures, well, you probably aren't fishing hard enough nor getting into the right spots either. We also saw that smaller fish are more likely to put themselves in harm's way, and bless their little hearts for that, because many a slow day has been saved for me by the enthusiasm of smaller fish. Fish will also use other fish for cover. They are less vulnerable when schools, even when not of the same species. Also, we learned that any depression in the riverbed can serve as shelter from the current. A lot of depressions are carved out by the current as it moves rocks around and stuff like that, but they can also be made by larger fish, i.e. salmon fanning out the riverbed for laying eggs. And lastly, a lot of trout do hold next to and behind boulders and wood. Always look for that slow water behind such structure. We didn't cover every spot fished like the hold here today, and in future videos we'll continue to examine more spots, but I hope for now this video has perhaps helped to show a little bit more about the world where fish live in, and more importantly, help you catch more fish. Thank you for watching.